Okay, year 11. So going through the rest of Act 3 then. So we had just left off with this part here with the contrast to Gerald, where Eva Smith has refused to take the money. First bit I'm going to come to is Mr. Burling here. Where did you get £50 from? So we can quite quickly see what his priorities are here. His priorities are the money, the theft, rather than Eva Smith and what's happened to her. There's no concern expressed for the fact that Eric has got her pregnant and left her in an incredibly desperate situation. Mr. Burling is prioritising the money. Down here to Mrs. Burling, so we have her bursting back into the room. She literally couldn't contain her and couldn't get her to stay in. I'm sorry, Arthur, but I simply couldn't stay in there. I had to know what's happening. So in terms of kind of the apology to Arthur, we see kind of gender expectations here and the fact that she's apologising for not following his command that she leaves the room earlier. But Mr. Burling doesn't seem particularly bothered by this because he's just clearly incredibly angry about Eric's admission. He speaks savagely. He's admitted he's responsible for the girl's condition, and now he's telling us he supplied her with money he stole from the office. And again, Mrs. Burling, her first priority here, shocked. Eric, you stole money. Not even acknowledging that Eric is responsible for Eva Smith's condition, i.e. the pregnancy. Mr. Burling incredibly outraged by this. Okay, moving on to Eric. There were some small accounts to collect and I asked for the cash, and then Mr. Burling butts in, gave the firm's receipt and then kept the money A. Eric is admitting here to how he covered up the theft. And I think that's interesting with Mr. Burling here. He recognises this way of doing it. He kind of immediately cons on to what he must have done. So suggestion that Mr. Burling is familiar with this kind of corruption. And again, Mr. Burling's focus here on this being what he needs to deal with. Give me a list of the accounts. I need to cover this up as soon as possible. So not just prioritising the money this time, but also prioritising kind of covering up any scandal. Okay, moving on to Eric then. So we have this discussion. Mr. Burling is basically saying, why didn't you come to me? Eric, you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble, that's why. So we have the lack of closeness between them. And then this quite ironic statement here from Mr. Burling, you've been spoilt. Ironic because, of course, spoiling comes from the parents. This is as a result of his and Mrs. Burling's raising of Eric, if it is that Eric is spoilt. Again, Inspector, coming back to how he always is, cutting in. My trouble is I haven't got much time. You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when you've gone. I think they just wanted to ensure I haven't much time, so a sense of urgency now. We're coming to the end of his investigation here. We've only got another page or so left with the Inspector. This kind of showing his purpose here. His purpose is for them to focus on their responsibility. And that's what he wants them to do once he's gone. Okay, moving on to the Inspector's last question for Eric then is that she discovered that he'd given her the money. She discovered that the money he's trying to give her is stolen. Eric, miserably, yes, that's the worst of all. She wouldn't take any more and she didn't want to see me again. So again, Eva's moral compass here. even in this incredibly desperate situation, she's cutting off this contact with Eric altogether. Then we have a sudden startled tone here. How did you know that? Did she tell you? So I think that for me, this is kind of like the start of Eric kind of cottoning on to the fact some of how this investigation is going down, or perhaps that there's something suspicious about the inspector. Again, you're going to excuse my handwriting with all of this, just because I'm writing one-handed while I hold the phone. Okay, so then Sheila reveals that this was revealed as part of Mrs. Burling's investigation. This is where we again start to see some real emotion from Mrs. Burling. She's not distressed by what she did. She's distressed partly that she was found out, but also partly that it is going to affect her family as well. So upset by effect on her family, which we do see when we see Eric responding to this. We have this real outburst of emotion, nearly at breaking point. We have all these dashes. He's really struggling to get his words out here. He's being very accusatory to his mother. You killed her repeated. The child she had, my child, your own grandchild, killed them both. Damn you, damn you. So Eric, accusatory. As well, kind of deep display of emotion for an Edwardian gentleman. Kind of showing just how affected he is by this. Gonna go with Edgent again for Edwardian gentleman, just for note purposes. Unexpected for Edgent, sorry. There we go. So Mrs. Burling is also distressed by this. I didn't know, I didn't understand. So we kind of do like a hint of remorse from Mrs. Burling, but it's only because it affected her family. This kind of an idea of not knowing, not understanding, again, this theme of ignorance that runs through. Also, we could argue selfishness, because she's only concerned when it affects her or her family directly. Eric, almost threatening her. You don't understand anything, you never did, you never even tried, you. So again, the ignorance, but also the kind of lack of closeness with the family. And then we have Mr. Burling intervening furiously at this point because of Eric speaking threateningly to his own mother. Why are you hysterical, young fool? Get back or I'll... So threatening. At this point, it's kind of almost turning into a fist fight with Mr. Burling and Eric. But we have the inspector, again, very much taking control of the situation here. He's using his authority, asserting his authority. Taking charge massively. Stop. So just incredibly simple instruction, but they are suddenly quiet, staring at him, so we can see the impact of the inspector here. Just one word said in the right tone, and it does quiet the family down. And then this is where he's done with them by this point. I don't need to know any more. Neither do you. This girl killed herself and died a horrible death, but each of you helped kill her. Remember that. Never forget it. A nice word to use with the inspector is didactic, which means teaching. So designed to teach. So we could use that to describe the inspector, or thinking of righteous intention, you could use it to describe the play as well. This is a didactic play. This is designed to teach people about their impact in society and their responsibility to others within their communities. And that's what he's trying to do here. Remember that, never forget it. We have kind of this message of the inspectors coming through here. But I don't think you ever will. Remember what you did, Mrs. Sperling. You turned her away when she most needed help. You refused her even a pitiable little bit of organised charity you had in your power to grant her. Remember what you did. Notable thing here is it's not Mrs. Sperling who responds, it's Eric. Even when this isn't what the inspector is saying, doesn't directly refer to Eric. We see his remorse here. Obviously, remember, if I'm going too quickly, you can pause me on a video. So, Inspector very directly speaking to Eric about what he did wrong. You just used her for the end of a stupid drunken evening, as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. No, you won't forget. So he understands the impact he's had on Eric. Very kind of visceral description for Eric's interaction with her. And that is impactful for Eric, because we've seen before how that's impactful for him. With Sheila, he doesn't even have to speak to her. He just looks at her. He looks at Sheila bitterly. I know. I had her turned out of job. I started it. So again, this kind of idea that they're on the same wavelength. They are very much seeing eye to eye at this point. Kind of mutual understanding between them. He doesn't even need to say, he just glances at her. And she feels that guilt, and she remembers what she did. Inspector, you helped but didn't start it. So again, kind of going a bit more kindly on Sheila than on the others, because then by contrast, he savagely turns on Burling. You started it. So this idea of blame and responsibility coming through with all of them, but in particular the kind of you started it feels more strongly and more accusatory than we've had with the others. Mr. Burling offering to give thousands and thousands, you're offering money at the wrong time. Arguably the reason he wants to offer money now is to cover their tracks and to avoid scandal. And the inspector does acknowledge that by saying it's the wrong time. And then we have, moving through, we have the inspector's kind of final message here. We don't yet, that comes here, sorry. Croft first, he talks about Gerald first. He at least held some affection for her, made her happy for a time. So acknowledging Gerald's care. Less blame definitely placed on Gerald here, because he at least was kind of understanding and caring towards Eva Smith or / Daisy Renton at that point in the play. We have Sheila's guilt here. So the inspector says you can't even say, I'm sorry, Eva Smith. Sheila's crying quietly. That's the worst of it. Then we get into the inspector's final message. So this is where we once again see the inspector being Priestley's socialist mouthpiece. There are millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives. So this idea of collective responsibility, this idea of community. Like back when we heard earlier in the play, mixed up like bees in a hive. So we once again see the inspector as Priestley's socialist mouthpiece. Try and show the idea that there is suffering in the world. There are people within our communities, within our societies, who perhaps because of the greed or the selfishness of their employers or people who have had authority over them are now suffering, and they are humans. He's trying to bring some humanity for it, their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering. He's trying to show the humanity of the working class. Remembering at this point as well, this isn't just a message to the Burlings, this is a message to the audience as well. We're post-World War II now. A time lacking in humanity, perhaps at times, and showing the importance of community at this point in society. This is a point where houses have been bombed, communities have been absolutely destroyed, husbands and fathers and brothers have been lost at war, and the communities need to rail together, they need to rally with each other and support each other. And that's part of the inspector's message, and via the Inspector Priestley's message as well, to his audience at the post-World War II as well. It's not just the Burlings in 1910, it's the message to society post-World War II. We need to work together. We need our community to be supportive of each other. There would be people in society at this point with horrific injuries sustained at war that need more social support than was necessarily available to them in 1945. So all of this is the inspector's message. We're all members of one body. We're responsible for each other. This idea of kind of collective responsibility. And then we have this quite ominous statement here. Kind of his final statement here. If men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. So obviously, in terms of the play, this is pre-World War I. Obviously, as there's a dramatic irony there that we as the audience know that there are years of fire and blood and anguish coming soon. And to the audience, this gives a sense that the inspector is almost omniscient, all-knowing. Because that's what he's referring to. He's referring to the difficulties that are coming soon with World War I and moving forwards in society, kind of the Great Depression of the late 1920s into the 30s, the World War II, 1930s into 1945, all of these terrible things that happen between when the play is set and when the play is written and performed to the audience. So there we have his final message. And again, this idea of being didactic. He's trying to teach us here, and he's trying to teach the Burlings as well. Okay, the inspector goes, and the family immediately start trying to place blame. So we have Mr. Burling immediately to Eric. And this is because he's the one that Burling focuses on being a scandal as well. That's why he thinks Eric is the most to blame, because he thinks that is the one that's likely to bring the scandal, which we see here yet. You don't realise yet all that you've done. Most of this is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal. It's his concern on reputation and appearance. And this is his immediate comments after the inspector has left. They don't know at this point that there was no, at this point, woman in the infirmary. However, this is his immediate concern. There's no concern for Eva Smith at all whatsoever at this point. Again, kind of bringing this idea of like how he's going to be damaged by this. So there's a selfishness here. Again, another key theme in the play. I was almost searching for knighthood in the next honours list. Eric is the one who kind of immediately is focusing on this idea of like, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, what matters is that somebody has died. So we've got Eric laughing here. Oh, for God's sake, what does it matter now that they give you a knighthood or not? So Eric focusing on impact. On Eva, kind of focusing on this idea of like these kind of positions being meaningless. The inspector's message has really worked on Eric, just as it has on Sheila. Burling sternly, it doesn't matter to you, apparently nothing matters to you, but it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you work for nothing, and there's going to be no more of this drinking around the town and picking up the women in the palace bar. So again, a real focus on reputation here. This is how he thinks Eric is going to regain his reputation. He's going to pay the money back. He's no longer going to the palace bar. He can no longer be known for his drinking as well. We have Mrs. Burling echoing similar statements like, I'm absolutely ashamed of you. So, yeah, kind of like disgusted at what he's done. And then Eric, in quite an inspector style way, I'm ashamed of you as well, turning those words back on them. Yes, both of you. He understands the real impact here. He understands that just because Mr. and Mrs. Burling didn't commit crimes as such, like he did, he still understands that actually they still did things to be ashamed of. They still did things that could be perceived as wrong, and they still did things that had an impact on another person's life. Going to Burling then, angrily drop that. There's every excuse for what your mother and I both did. It turned out, unfortunately, that's all. So the every excuse, we've got the refusal to accept responsibility. And then that's all. Sheila picks up on that. That's all. It's almost as if Mr. Burling's forgotten what's important here. Well, what have you to say? I don't know where to begin. Then don't begin. Nobody wants you to. I behaved badly. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened. So again, Sheila, understanding. The impact. Accepting her responsibility. I'm going to put blame because I'm running out of room, but if you've got room, put responsibility. Over we go. This is Mr. Burling, so I said there'll be a public scandal unless we're lucky, and who here will suffer that more than I will. Another great example of selfishness from Mr. Burling. The idea of kind of suffering, just complete ignorance over the fact that clearly Eva Smith has suffered more than he has. Sheila, the point is you don't seem to have learnt anything. So we have the impact of the inspector. The idea of learning something, coming back to this being a didactic play, with the message of changing, being responsible. She has learnt that. Mr. Burling doesn't get it. Don't I? You're quite wrong there. I've learnt plenty tonight. Well, he has, in the sense that he's learnt what his family have done, but he hasn't learnt anything deeper. There's no real moral understanding there. It's very shallow. Moving down to Eric. Eric brings it back to the conversation that was had before the inspector arrives. You told us that a mouse make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else as if we're all mixed up together. So we bring it back to Mr. Burling's kind of scathing comments on socialism before the inspector arrived. almost kind of like mocking him. One of those cranks walked in, laughs bitterly. Sheila once again picks upon something that sparks her interest and perhaps makes her suspicious, so she's sharply attentive. Is that when the inspector came, just after Father had said that? And then here, it's queer, very queer. She looks at them reflectively. So putting together more of the story. Again, showing her intelligence. Something that I think is notable through the rest of the play now, in stage directions, is Mr. and Mrs. Burling's excitement. As soon as they pick up on anything where they think they can get out of this, or they can escape the blame, or they can escape the public scandal, we have this idea of excitement coming through. So we have it here, Burling rather excited. We have it a few more times on the next few pages as well. So from Mr. and Mrs. Burling, from both of them, there's almost this kind of glee at the idea of escaping the scandal. Again, just showing their ignorance, showing how little they've learnt. Because ultimately they've all still done these terrible things, they've all still done these things to another person, but their focus now, it's almost like they feel like they've got away with it. Sheila, it doesn't matter much now, of course, but was he really a police inspector? Sheila does understand that there is still meaning here, there is still something to be learned from this, even if the inspector isn't real. Mr. Burling doesn't see that, it makes all the difference. Sheila, no, it doesn't. So we have this conflict of ideology between them. Sheila sees that even if the police inspector wasn't real, that there's still importance and meaning and loss of life and impact on other people. But Mr. Burling just doesn't seem to see it at all. He thinks it makes all the difference that the inspector wasn't real just because they will escape that scandal. Mrs. Burling very much obviously in agreement with her husband as always. Don't be childish, Sheila. I'm not being, if you want to know, it's you two who are being childish, not to face the facts. I won't have that sort of talk, any more of that, and you'll leave this room. That'll be terrible for her, won't it? So we have this, again, like the tension between the family members that we've seen building gradually through the play. You leave this room, again, the kind of the patronising that we've seen before, treating her like a child for having an opinion. Again, Sheila repeating back their words, reminiscent of the inspector. She's not just taken on his beliefs and his ideology, she's almost taken on his mannerisms and way of speaking as well. Sheila continues, it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess, it was true, wasn't it? So kind of valuing the truth here, something we've seen previously from Sheila as well. She does very much value truth and honesty. With Eric, she can't quite bring herself to say what he did. We see that with a couple of the characters as well. They can't quite put it into words what Eric did because they understand that it was truly terrible. That's what's important. What they did is what's important. So again, she has very much understood Inspector's purpose.
This is where she does mention her theory that she didn't think he was a police inspector. I had an idea, I had it all along vaguely. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector. So again, showing her intelligence. She was the first one to cotton on to this. Her understanding. Again, look, as soon as there's like a hint that this might be okay for the family in terms of their reputation, we have Mr. Burling again rather excited. And again, he brings in, it comes back to this constant bragging. He must have known I was an ex-Lord Mayor and a magistrate and so forth. This assumption that people should treat him right because he has rank and position within the community. Sheila and Eric are very much on the same page now. We see quite a few times now through the rest of the scene this kind of back and forth between Eric and Sheila of one of them agreeing and the other kind of backing them up as well. So we have Eric and Sheila in agreement. Their relationship has been built stronger by this. The only one that seems to have done, but they kind of think back to them at the beginning, kind of silly joking comments at each other, like quite childish, he's squiffy, things like that back at the beginning, and now we have them showing real maturity actually. And they are definitely the only ones who has built their relationship stronger through this experience as well. So on to Mr. Burling. That's comic, that is coming from you. You're the one who makes the most difference to you. You've confessed to theft. That's his priority. Eric has confessed to a hell of a lot more than theft. However, that is Mr. Burling's priority, is the money and the wealth that's been lost, and then having to cover it up for their reputation. He can ruin you, you know, so again, this focus on reputation here. Sheila again showing her insight into the inspector's way of investigating. We hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that? And then this is where they start to become quite accusatory towards each other. If we hadn't talked so much, he'd have had a little to go on, looks angrily at them. And really, when I come to think of it, why you all had to go letting everything come out like that beats me. Mr. Burling did himself as well. He did tell his side of the story too. So we have this kind of this accusatory behaviour, but they're kind of almost like forgetting, I suppose, like forgetting the interaction that's actually happened. Not just forgetting the meaning, but kind of almost forgetting how it went down as well. Then Mrs. Burling, he didn't make me confess. I told him quite plainly I thought I had done no more than my duty. So again, just very dismissive from Mrs. Burling, refusal to accept her responsibility. Mrs. Burling clearly values duty. She's the one who brought in that concept of duty before as well, with the inspector and having to do his duty by catching the father of the child. So she's the one who keeps bringing in this idea of duty. So that's clearly a value of Mrs. Burling's. But I suppose we could argue it's quite a false value in a way, because different people have different perceptions of that. So it's quite almost like a superficial value. Burling, you allowed yourselves to be bluffed. Yes, bluffed. So again, this similar idea there to his wife, dismissive. This part here, so he was prejudiced from the start, probably a socialist or some sort of cranky talk like one. This Mr. Burling clearly seems to think that this is more about kind of who they are as people rather than their actions. So kind of he acknowledges inspectors' socialist method, but in the same breath also completely dismisses it as well. Using this word crank again, kind of more like 1910s equivalent of like idiot or fool or something like that. Dismissive. Another interesting one from Mrs. Burling. Really, from the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now just be quiet, now your father can decide what we ought to do. Help him instead of us. So Mrs. Burling acknowledging that her children's have kind of seen the inspector's view of this, are kind of expressing those views that are perhaps more socialist leaning. Of her children. Then they have this idea of Mr. Burling needing to take control again. Be quiet so your father can decide what we ought to do. We'll have to do something and get to work quickly. So Mr. Burling taking back the control that he hasn't had for a while because the inspector very much was holding that authority and control. He was here. This was just a really small little, almost throwaway comment, but I just think it's interesting in terms of Mrs. Burling's treatment of workers in the working class. Mr. Burling does offer to go get the door. No, Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea. So this idea of kind of control over working class. If you think of the phrase, actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Burling here, like her actions are showing she hasn't learned at all from her lessons about how to treat other people. She is kind of taking advantage of Edna, and it must be very late at night by now. They've had their dinner party and they've gone through the whole investigation. So they're still kind of leaving Edna hanging and not letting her retire for the evening. So she has not changed. So we still have that mistreatment of the working classes. Okay, so this part here is just Gerald returning, so I haven't pulled anything out specific at this point until we have this kind of reveal of Gerald is trying to kind of, I think Gerald's enjoying this. Gerald could have just come back in and just said, right, I've spoken to someone, I found out he's not really an inspector. Whereas Gerald draws it out a little bit. He asks some questions. How did he behave? When did the inspector go? So we have Gerald drawing out the reveal, almost kind of savouring the news. Then we do have their revealing of their suspicions. He's spoken in a very peculiar and suspicious manner. Gerald, again, this is kind of like, for me, this is showing him drawing it out and enjoying it. I've got like a little, it's kind of like a knowing sound. And again, look at Mr. Burling. As soon as there is a hint that something might be not quite how they thought it was, again, he's excited. That's not how you spell relieved, sorry. So relieved, but I hope they may get away with it, which I'm putting in brackets because as we know, they don't really get away with it, but we have this kind of this joy, this glee from Mr. Burling again, as soon as there's possibility or a hope. Okay, we're nearly there. Very close now. So slowly again, kind of savouring that reveal. That man wasn't a police inspector. Again, that joy, that glee, praising Gerald here, so excited, saying, "Good lad." So he tells us about how he asked a policeman on the street about an Inspector Gould, Burling, kind of momentary concern for reputation, concerned that perhaps Gerald has said the real story. Again, Mr. Burling excitedly, "By jingo, we're fake." So again, that joy and that excitement, that glee over this not being real. So again, they're just completely forgetting, aren't they, by this point? So forgetting message. This is another stage direction we see a couple of times from Mr. and Mrs. Burling as we move towards the end now. This idea of triumph, it's this idea of kind of like victory, as if they've won something over the inspector. Gerald interestingly just reverts to type by the end. So if we remember Gerald at the beginning, he would very much kind of say what Mr. Burling would say. He would be in agreement with Mr. Burling. During his investigation, he was starting to see it from Sheila's point of view, from the inspector's point of view. But we have Gerald reverting to type. All that character development for nothing. So again, Mr. Burling taking control. "I'm going to make certain of this." Even Gerald's word, he doesn't quite trust. He wants to be the one in control of this situation. So this is when we have the phone call. By the time we have the end of the phone call, we have this, again, this ignorance shining through. "I felt it all the time. He never talked like one. He never even looked like one." So we have them, in a way, kind of backtracking on anything that really happened. This makes a difference, you know. In fact, it makes all the difference, of course. So we have them in agreement. So think about Gerald, so back to agreeing with Burling. We have Sheila talking bitterly here, so she's the voice of cynicism now that we've lost the inspector. I suppose we're all nice people now. Essentially taking on the role of the inspector by this point in the play. Burling, "And you'd better keep quiet anyhow. If he had been a police inspector and he'd heard you confess," so this is to Eric. We have this quite a lot of anger towards Eric, and we know from before that the thing he's concerned about, investing about, is the theft. So we have this anger directed at Eric. There's real rift between Eric and Mr. Burling now. They were never particularly close at the beginning, but now it just seems almost irreconcilable by this point. Gerald doesn't want to know any more about the involvement, so perhaps it's kind of dismissing the investigation and its message altogether. Mr. Burling's reasons for why this might have happened. So Gerald says, "What do you make of it? Was it a hoax?" Mr. Burling, "Of course, somebody put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. There are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that." So again, it kind of very self-centered. That must be why. It couldn't possibly be because, like some of our theories, that there was a girl and it was a relative seeking vengeance, or this is somebody kind of trying to make them see the wrongs of their lifestyle. No, it must be, but just because someone dislikes him, has it in for him. Incredibly self-centered here. Again, kind of justifying why they did give in to the inspector, as we saw just after the phone call as well. So he's kind of saying that he did it because the inspector had come during their celebration and he was surprised. Miss Burling, I wish I'd been here when that man first arrived. So again, kind of saying she, like, trying to almost kind of backtrack on what she did and say, oh, if I had been there, I would have done it differently and this wouldn't have gone down as it was. Sheila, it's all right saying that now, so Sheila is still trying to get them to see what's important here. Again, just being the only one who's kind of being logical and sensible and honest about this. She knows that there is, like, they can't change what they did, they can't change what they said. Mrs. Burling's response, I was the only one of you who didn't give in to him, and now I must say we discussed this business quietly and sensibly and decide if there's anything to be done about it. So again, this focus on covering up and reputation. Mr. Burling heartily approves with her, so I feel like we have this divide at this point. We have Mrs. Burling, Mr. Burling versus Eric and Sheila, and we have Gerald now kind of siding with the former as well. So this divide initially between the kind of the age groups, but then also Gerald, because he is at that slightly higher position in society, because of his parents being Lord and Lady Croft, he sides with the kind of more older, archaic ideas as well. So this is, again, so we see them in agreement with each other. We're back to Gerald almost kind of sucking up to Mr. Burling. That kind of self-importance again of, oh, maybe if someone's hoaxing us, they're going to do it again. We see this divide forming here. Eric won't even kind of sit down with the family. And Mr. Burling says, you're doing it as if you want nothing to do with us. Here we see some quite deep sympathy from Eric. And again, we see these two kind of more joint in ideas. And we'll see that again, like I said before, we see that quite frequently now. Again, here, Eric says something, Sheila's in agreement. And we keep seeing that with the two of them. They are backing each other up now. They are much more close and they are much more on the same page now, the two of them. Mr. Burling, we found him out and all we had to do is keep our heads. Now it's our turn. Almost quite an ominous statement there from Mr. Burling. Kind of suggesting perhaps some kind of payback or revenge perhaps. But again, we have this kind of this glee. We found him out. Almost as if it's some kind of like game or investigation, not investigation, some kind of game or something to kind of like get to find out and something to kind of like investigate in a game. I'm losing my train of thought. It's now quite late. It's like a game to him. He's found him out. Anyway, moving on to Eric, bursting out here. What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all. And I can't see it like that. This girl's still dead, isn't she? Nobody's brought her to life, have they? So Eric, valuing the importance of Eva's life, showing a much more caring and sympathetic side to himself than he did with his interaction with her. He has learnt from the inspector. And again, the two of them in agreement here. That's what I feel, Eric, and it's what they don't seem to understand. We have a lot of kind of othering language as we move through the rest of the scenes. Either Mr. Burling or Mrs. Burling calling Sheila and Eric they, or Eric and Sheila calling Mr. and Mrs. Burling they. So we have this kind of othering language, this divide through pronouns. like two camps have formed. And again, Eric's still going, like, whatever that chapter, the fact remains, I did what I did, Mother did what she did, the rest of you did what you did to her. So Eric very much still here, same idea here, very much valuing Eva's life, has learnt his lesson, understands the kind of importance of the inspector's message. Burling tries to interrupt, I don't care, let him know, the money's not the important thing. So there's real contrast to Mr. Burling, that's all he seems to value, that's his main focus. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. So, accepting his social responsibility. Okay, moving on to Sheila again, very much in agreement with her brother, and Eric's absolutely right. It's the best thing that any of us have said tonight, and it makes me feel a little bit less ashamed of us. You're just beginning to pretend all over again. So we have this difference between older and younger generation. Again, Sheila's value of humanity here because she appreciates what Eric has said. Okay, we're nearly there. This is the theirs again. When we did they're so damn exasperating, they just won't understand. So again, like we said down here, that othering and that divide through pronouns there that we see before. Exasperated, kind of like he's just frustrated with them. He's frustrated that they are not seeing things how he does. And then we have Eric getting quite angry again, shouting, and I say the girl's dead and we've all helped kill her and that's what matters. We have this kind of forming aggression between the two of them, this conflict. So we have these differing ideologies. Burling being quite nasty to Eric here, threatening him. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by this time. Hold your tongue if you want to stay here. Eric, I don't give a damn now whether I stay here or not. So kind of similarly to when he wouldn't even sit down with them. Kind of distancing himself from his family. Again, look what Mr. Burling's priority is. You'll stay here long enough to take an account of the money. That's terrible, sorry. Prioritizing the money again, just as he did before. Look at these two in agreement again, Sheila and Eric. That won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it? And it doesn't alter the fact that we all helped to kill her. It's almost kind of as if they're saying that the same thought, doesn't it? The fact that Eric's starting out with an and, with a connective. They're very much of one mind at this point. That line could have been delivered by just one of them, couldn't it? So we have that unity between the siblings here because they both see it in the same way. Then we have Gerald starting to bring in this doubt of whether or not they killed Eva Smith. So throughout these pages, I haven't actually pulled out too much throughout these pages because there's a lot of kind of backwards and forwards with kind of Gerald rehashing what's happened, and then Gerald's kind of drip feeding in his theory again. Did we who say so? Because I said there's no real evidence. We have no more real evidence we did than there was that chap was a police inspector. Gerald all this time clearly has this theory about the photograph, and again he's making it last until here. This is where he finally brings it in. How do you know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one your father looked at? So again, Gerald Again, kind of taking pleasure in his reveal. He thinks he's worked out something about this. He's like elongating it again. Kind of picking up on the inspector's way of doing this. It's very artfully working on bits of information. He picks up here and there, bluffs us into confessing. So Gerald quite smugly here, thinking he's worked out the inspector. And then again, look at these stage directions. Similarly to the excitedly, we've got eagerly. Gerald is triumphant as well. So we have all this joy and this sense of victory when they think they finally kind of won up to the inspector and they think they've finally pieced his big plan together. Then his big reveal of what he thinks has really happened. His suspicion. It had a long build-up. Kind of continuing on, we have no proof it's the same photograph. Look at Mr. Burling again, eagerly. Again, kind of picking up on any hope that this may not have happened and the reputation is saved. Again, we have them kind of justifying why they behaved in the way that they did, justifying their response to investigation. So Mrs. Burling says she acted like a fool. She was so worried when he suddenly turned on her with those questions. Again, he's trying to kind of, like, Gerald really is trying to work hard here to convince Sheila and Eric. Because again, he doesn't see the value of this investigation, even if they are different people, even if this hasn't truly happened the way the inspector reported that it did. Gerald is now on the side of Mr. and Mrs. Burling of not really appreciating the value that can be had from it. Eric is very much trying to kind of support the inspector here. The girl who went round to see Mother, she said she had to help because she wouldn't take any stolen money. And the girl I knew had told me already. So Eric is on the inspector's side here. Again here, Gerald now clearly on Mr. and Mrs. Burling's side. Believing that it's all nonsense at this point. Eric showing his humanity here. I don't see any nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself. We did her in all right, accepting his responsibility. Or blame. Mr. Burling, that interview with your mother could just as much have been a put-up job like all this police inspector business. The whole damned thing can have been a piece of bluff. Kind of embellishing the conspiracy here to try and make himself feel better. I feel like Mr. Burling would love a conspiracy theory. Burling, how do we know she is? That's right, you've got it. So these two on the same page now. And look again, that triumph again. We have so many of these similar stage directions towards the end. You can just imagine the actors towards the end really kind of playing up that sense of excitement and triumph and eagerness that we see from the stage directions. Just completely out of kilter with the mood of the play. We've had this very serious play about this suicide, and then this kind of real sense of joy towards the end when they think they've got away with it. Well, the first thing he has to do is give us a shock that after he can bluff us all the time, so he starts right off. A girl has died in the infirmary, drank some strong disinfectant, died in agony. Burling has now kind of cottoned on to the inspector's methods and is repeating them. Clearly still effective. Eric, don't pile it on. So it's still having an effect on him. His care, his empathy, just like we've seen from Sheila throughout the play. Again, but Mr. Burling thinks like, oh, that's all part of it. He's meant to shake you a bit. Eric won't agree with this. Eric won't admit to, like the others, Eric won't come to the conclusion that they have, that it is all a hoax. So that if there's still that doubt from Eric, he's not as certain as the others are. No police inquiry, no girl that will happen to, no scandal. Again, his priority here is the family, the reputation. Sheila's the one that brings it back to what it is all about, Eva Smith and her death. This is when they decide to phone the infirmary up. Again, this kind of focus on appearance. He's concerned how it will look if they ring up at this time of night and ask about whether someone's come in. That's his immediate concern, even though he knows that's what they want to do to kind of corroborate this story. Almost there. Look, again, triumphant. So this is after the phone call. Again, we have this sense of victory, this glee that we've seen before. A huge sigh of relief as well. So again, kind of as if nothing has changed here. Complete refusal to kind of accept blame in a sense, but also kind of like just the relief that now their reputation has been saved. Oh, I need to be quick, my memory's full. So smiling, again, this kind of out of I guess out of kilter. That kind of means like it's not situationally appropriate. This kind of like sense of relief from both of them. Mr. Burling here, I had a special reason for not wanting any public scandal just now. Quite ambiguous. He could mean the engagement. He could mean this potential knighthood that he seems to think he's going to get. Both of which, though, ultimately make him look good, raise his status. So either way, that's what his concern was ultimately. Sheila, the worst part is you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really had happened. If it didn't end tragically, then that's lucky for us, but it might have done. Sheila's been quite quiet for a while now, but she's still accepting wrongdoing. Even though by this point they think the inspector isn't real, they think that Eva Smith wasn't the same girl, they think that she hasn't killed herself at this point. Sheila will still accept wrongdoing. She's still learnt her lesson. Mr. Burling then is quite mocking. He imitates the inspector. He laughs as well, kind of when he repeats that part from the inspector's final speech. So he's mocking the inspector by this point. Sheila, very much again, kind of like Eric is, separating herself from her family. I want to get out of this. It frightens me the way you talk. So showing her humanity here, because she can't see the humour in this. Mr. Burling thinks that kind of everything has gone back to normal. Look, you better ask Gerald for that ring you gave him back to him, hadn't you? For Mr. Burling, it's as if nothing has changed. As Sheila says, I'm passionately pretending everything's just as it was before. So still acknowledging and admitting her wrongdoing, her guilt that she feels. Again, look at these two. Eric, I'm not. No, but these others are. So again, these two are united. So nothing really happens, so there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did. Well, why shouldn't we? Mrs. Burling's complete and utter ignorance, her complete and utter refusal to change, even in the face of all this evidence of things that they've done wrong and things that the ways that they've hurt people, she just doesn't see why that they should change. Sheila, whoever the inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You know it then. You began to learn something and now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way. So with this idea, kind of bringing this idea of societal progress as well. If we think of the Burlings representing older generations and representing the kind of more right-leaning views of the middle to upper class, think about society in general in the 1940s, at the time when Priestley is writing. We do have this movement towards socialism, this idea that maybe we could have a national health service where if people need support, they could seek that if they need kind of urgent medical care or if they need ongoing treatment. We have kind of developing ideas around social security and if there are people in society who can't work. Again, like Sheila's kind of bringing in some of those ideas that society can't stay the way it did. Things do need to change. Sheila, no, but I remember what he said, how he looked and what he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish. And it frightens me the way you talk and I can't listen to any more of it. So he has had the biggest impact, arguably, on Sheila. Again, she's now becoming, we could actually say that she's now the inspector's, what's the word I'm after? Mouthpiece, that's the word I'm after. Now that he's gone, she's kind of taken on that mantle of being the inspector. She's using his words here, fire and blood and anguish. And we have again Eric in agreement. It frightens him too. So again, we see that unity between the siblings. And we have that real divide here between the older and younger generation. Priestley, I'm sure, in terms of his writer's intentions, was hoping that by the end that his audience would see, actually, Eric and Sheila are in the right here and they are the ones who are showing more humanity and care and compassion for the community around them. And I'm sure he would be hoping that the audience would be ridiculing and laughing at Mr. and Mrs. Burling. Here, again, this kind of patronising behaviour. They're overtired. In the morning, I'm sure they'll be as amused as we are. Mrs. Burling just doesn't get it. Complete and utter ignorance here. Sorry about the handwriting. I keep getting a message flashing up saying that my memory is full, so I'm trying to go super speedy. Then we have Gerald asking if he can give her the ring back. Not yet, too soon, I must think. This here, this comment here, kind of linking with what I've just said about this divide between the younger generation. This is just so interesting for me, this comment, because that is still a rhetoric that we see to this point today. I'm sure those of you who spend any time online will see the kind of rhetoric around snowflake culture, snowflake generation, the woke generation. And we still have that. Look at this, it's the exact same argument that people still use today. The famous younger generation who know it all, they can't even take a joke. So we have this societal divide. between the older and the younger generation. Remember what I've said before, that historically socialist leaning tendencies were linked with younger generations, and then historically people became more right-leaning as they got older. Doesn't happen anymore. So more associated. If you're interested in politics, I would suggest looking at those graphs because they're really interesting about how politics has changed over the last 30 years or so. So left-leaning / socialist views. And then, so we